haven't really been that helpful in the sense that we're just like, you can't revise for it.
I'm like convinced that if I did the part now, I would still struggle probably just as much as when I did it. Like.
Hey everyone, long time no see. I feel like I haven't actually spoken to you or done a video recently since I've been at Oxford, mainly because obviously I've been uploading my study China vlogs, and if you haven't watched any of them already, I would really recommend it if you're considering maybe studying abroad for a little bit or doing some kind of summer programme, because it was fully funded by the British Council, and it's a really good programme that I would highly recommend. So go and check those out if you haven't already. The last one will be out this coming Thursday, and after that, I know you've all been waiting for them, but the Oxford vlogs will be back, so bear with me. I still need to edit quite a lot of them, but the Freshers Week vlog will be out the week after. So yeah, I know it's been quite a long time since I've spoken to you, or you kind of see me on camera. If you don't follow me on Instagram stories, I mainly post things on there. I don't really use Snapchat that much anymore. So in a second, I have got a load of lovely volunteers to come and talk about their admissions tests and any last minute tips they have for you and how they prepared for theirs. So hopefully this video is useful. I do apologise for my appearance because I have not slept well for the past week. I've had a lot of work on, I've been rushing around doing everything. I have got a bit sick. I apologise. I'm so dedicated to the cause. I'm filming this video when I know that I need to wash my hair, when I know that I have my essay to write, but yeah, I know that this video needs to go out very, very soon because the admissions tests are in a week's time by the time this video goes out, I think. So yeah, I wish you all the best of luck, and I really hope you find this useful. Again, apologies for my appearance.
Hi, I'm Ollie. I'm at New College. I'm a first year. I study French and beginner's Russian.
I'm Grace. I'm a second year doing French at New College.
I'm Rihanna. I'm also second year doing French and Spanish at New College.
So yeah, so I had 2 tests to do. So I had the MLAT, which is the Modern Languages Admissions Test,
Yeah.
I think, which was for French. So that was half an hour and it's basically just a grammar test. And then for Russian, because I'm beginner's Russian, I didn't have a grammar test. It's called the LAT. So I think Viola also had to do it, but it's kind of slightly different to classics. So it's only a half an hour grammar test, and it's just testing sort of how you would approach something you've never seen before. Sort of, do you think logically, can you spot patterns, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I just had to do the MLAT because I just do French, so it was just a half an hour grammar test, sort of gap fill exercises and translating things. And if you actually want to have a look at some papers, if you just Google Oxford MLAT, there's a bank of I think 8 years of past MLAT papers which you can do for fun. But what I did was, I'm not sure they actually had them up because I did my MLAT in 2015, but I found some through Student Room that some teacher must have scanned and put online.
I think they're on WebLearn.
Yeah, they are now. I'm not sure they were
Yeah.
a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
but I printed a few off and did them under the time conditions, and got my tutor at sixth form to mark them for me so I could work out what sort of things I needed to
Because I think they don't give you the answers online. I think
No, they just give you
answers.
but
Yeah.
I think as well, like the main thing I found was just getting used to doing it in the short period of time, because it can be quite tempting to sort of obsess over one of the questions, whereas actually it meant that on the day I just sort of did what I could, then went back and filled the gaps, and then it was alright that way.
Yeah, I also did the MLAT, so I had 2 papers, one for French and one for Spanish, and both of them were also half an hour. Yeah, like Grace said, I think practice is basically just the most helpful thing, because you can kind of spot patterns and really similar like style questions come up. So, you know, for like French, they're always going to test you on the subjunctive, they're always going to test you on the really weird like irregular verbs, so like knowing how to conjugate them in the press rate, that kind of stuff.
I think though it's kind of like if you're doing your A-level or whatever, you know that there are certain things that they're going to try and put in there to sort of catch you out.
Yeah,
so
there are certain grammar points that you kind of should know at that stage,
Yeah,
and then
and
they're just going to test whether you really know how to use them.
Yeah, there's nothing in there that like is crazily beyond what you'd be expected to know at that age. Just checking that you can actually speak a little bit of the language, you do have some sort of linguistic ability and you can spot patterns and things. They're not expecting you to be fluent, it's just checking that you're at a reasonable level so you would be able to cope with the language work here.
So over the summer I bought like a big French grammar book and I kind of just went through that.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I wish I'd done that. No, I think if you sort of on top of language work with
Yeah.
your A-level or IB or whatever, like, you'd probably be alright, but
Mm.
that is one way you can practice, is just sort of
Yeah.
going over like the key grammar points and just, I don't know.
Yeah, I was
That's
really
really
lucky. Like, my teacher at school there were a bunch of us applying all for languages, so he decided he was going to do some like lunchtime sessions, and he kind of,
That's really good.
yeah, he printed out past paper MLATs and kind of made us do it, some of them in time conditions, some of them he gave to us as extra homework, which was lovely. He even gave us some translations, because there's a little bit of the MLAT where you have to translate a few sentences. But I think the main point is they are testing your grammar, so don't worry about the vocab side, because it's all
Yeah.
really basic stuff. Yeah, you just get better as you keep doing it. And with Spanish, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just knowing which points to kind of focus on. Like, every language has bits of grammar that always catch people out, and that's what they're going to test you on. So with Spanish, it would be like the difference between por and para and like ser and estar. And it's just kind of knowing when to use that, and that just comes with practice.
I think as well, I was speaking to a friend who did the language aptitude test for
Yeah.
beginners Portuguese, and she was saying that her teacher recommended that if she was looking at a sentence and she couldn't actually fill in an answer, but she knew sort of what the grammar rule was, like this should be a subjunctive or something, to actually write that on. Like, you don't know how they mark it, but that's definitely not a bad idea. If you can't answer it, don't freak out. Like, they're just trying to work out sort of your thought process. And
No, definitely, I'd agree. Someone told me that, like, they don't necessarily look for the right answer in that case. They're more interested in how you're thinking. And I think a lot of people, like, I didn't finish it. Most people I knew at school didn't finish it. They don't expect you to get it all right. They just want to see, are you approaching it in a logical way, and sort of your thought processes. So definitely, just write what you're thinking, just write it down.
And I remember them saying at one of the language open days I went to that nobody gets 100%.
Yeah,
They don't
exactly.
expect anyone to get, like, even as a native speaker, you probably wouldn't get 100%. Like, you
Yeah.
wouldn't get 100% in one in English, chances are. But they must just have, like, a certain kind of mark that, combined with all the other factors, all the
Yeah,
other
exactly.
parts of your application, don't stress out about it too much. It's just them checking that, you know, you be able to cope, I guess, with the workload when you get here.
Yeah, I think what Grace said about like the other parts of the application, I think it's important not to kind of stress too much about it, because it might seem like your entire like offer for an interview kind of rests on doing the MLAT, but they do take into consideration the fact that you've sent in some of your essays, your personal statements. So.
And your predicted grades, like there's so many
Yeah.
all of the circumstantial stuff, like, yeah, I think there's like a lot of this kind of part of the Oxford myth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sitting, you know, if you've seen the History Boys or something, you sit the exam and like you've got to, you know, really impress them. Well, actually they just want to
Yeah.
check that you're alright
Yeah.
in your subject.
So yeah, definitely take it seriously, but don't stress about it if it goes badly. Like, there's so many other things.
Hi, I'm Lucy, I'm a fresher, I'm at New College, I do history and economics. So for the hack test, what I did was I did quite a lot of reading of just like introductions to books and like looking at like historians' arguments, because you have to use that in the historian's interpretation. I also then looked in my textbooks for like primary resources and tried to like analyse them, and got textbooks in subjects that I didn't actually do, like, because for A-level I did like Russian history, so I looked at like Chinese history, like tried to look at those ones for like stuff that I didn't have context to. And then just in the days before, I just did like a hat test every day, just to like practice my timing, like know what I was going to do when I actually got in there. So in the test you have first, I can't remember what order it is in, but first you have like a historian's interpretation, and you have to like talk about like their main argument. So you just read, like scan through it first and then pick out the main points of emphasis. And then the next question is on primary resources. You just have to talk about primary resource. So like go through it first, highlight it, annotate it, then like pick out the points in some sort of order and then write your essay. And then because I do history and economics, I had to do the maths part instead of doing the other essay question. So for the maths part, I think my main tip would be just keep calm, because the questions are meant to be oddly worded, and it's not a test of your actual maths ability. It's a test of how well you can try and work out what they're trying to ask you, and then use maths to work that out. And I don't think I got what my answers right, but I think they just want you to have a go. So that'd be my main tip.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I study Economics and Management. I'm in my second year.
Hi, I'm Ollie. I'm a second year classicist.
So for Economics and Management, the admissions test is called the Thinking Skills Assessment, and it's really just testing how you go about solving problems and how you evaluate arguments, and both of those skills are actually really important when it comes to writing essays and also doing problem sheets for economics. And I think what helped me most with the TSA was just doing practice. It's not so much a skill that you can learn more, you can get better at it by doing practice questions. There's lots of papers online, and I would say really focus on the problems that you find the hardest. So for me, I found the argument questions quite hard, where you're given a passage and you have to draw conclusions from it. So practice really helped me with that. One more thing about the TSA, it's a really time pressured test, so I think you have 50 questions to do in just over an hour. So in a way it's good to focus on the questions that you know you can do well. So there were a few math style questions that I was never very good at. So because it is so time pressured, it does actually help to kind of skip the ones that you know will take longer on, do the ones that you are more confident in, and if you do have time you can go back to them, because I think that's probably the best way to get marks in what is a really time pressured paper. And the TSA is actually made up of 2 papers, so I guess the second paper, the essay, might be a bit more similar to classics. You're given 3 questions, and they're all very broad questions that you can kind of think about and just write down your thoughts. So very different to the first part, and that's actually where you can kind of be yourself a bit more. If you've read something really interesting on that subject, it's good to kind of just put in whatever you can think of and make an argument for that question.
Yeah, classics, don't be yourself, just translate the text. Yeah, I mean, for classics it depends what course you're applying for. So if you're applying for 1A, you'll have both a Latin and a Greek session, each an hour and a half. If you're applying for 1B or 1C, it'll be an hour and a half of the language you're applying for. And if you're doing 2A or 2B, it'll be a test in a language which is made up of kind of test for general linguistic skills. So I was doing both Latin and the Greek tests, and essentially it's translation of a verse and a prose passage, and it's just bits of real text, sometimes which they've taken sections of it, and it's fairly short, but can be quite challenging. So I would just advise practicing reading different kinds of authors and texts, because you don't know which ones are going to come up, revising vocab and grammar, kind of general things like that. You can't really prepare for it in any other way than just reading text, because it fundamentally is just any text they can choose, I think. Yeah. And timing for the classics paper is quite important, because you've got about 45 minutes for each section. Some of them you will find just very difficult, and some of them you won't. So you've got to kind of be very strict with yourself, maybe say 40 minutes for each section, and then stop what you're doing, go into the next part, and then you'll probably make up that time somewhere else, and then you've got some extra time in the bank later on. Yeah, I think it's all about just keeping calm and just thinking slowly, because you have got time. It's a 3-hour exam, so you don't need to be writing like madly the whole time. You just need to think and then write kind of after you've had a long, hard think about what the passage means, basically.
I did the classics language aptitude test. It's not like the Latin and Greek test, which other classicists have to do. So my test was an hour long. It was 3 years ago, but it was an hour long, and they had various grammar questions. So they made up a language, and they gave you example sentences and translations, and then they gave you passages that you had to translate using this made up language and seeing how you could notice patterns in the examples that they gave you. And then they also had really obscure languages where you had to answer grammar questions or fill in a grammar table, or kind of parse the words. It sounds really weird to everyone else because it's a made-up language, but it makes sense when you're doing the paper because they give you examples. The way I prepared for it was, I think there's a couple of past papers online, so I worked through those, but the bad thing was that there's no mark scheme. I don't know if it's the same for you guys.
Yeah.
There's no mark scheme, so it was really bad, and I was translating this made-up language, and I had no idea if I was translating the language correctly because it was made up and not even a language that I could actually check online if I was translating it correctly. So I worked through those in like a time condition. I think I found In the end, I think I found about 5 different tests online, because my test, there was only 1 or 2. But if you do modern languages and you have to do one of the aptitude tests, you can use the modern language aptitude test, because that's also a very similar test. It's only about half an hour long though instead. And then if you do Oriental Studies, you have to do an language aptitude test as well. So I used their ones that I found online, and I just did lots of Google searching, and did about 5 or 6 past papers. So I did those, even though I didn't know if I was answering them correctly or not. And I think that's mainly all I did. I mean, I couldn't really do anything else because it was a made-up language, and I couldn't really revise anything. So my advice to anyone doing the language test would be, when you have to look at this made-up language they give you about, I think it's 5 or 6 sentences, and then they give you the translation, and then the way they use the words are in different ways. So one time they'll use a word as a subject, one time they'll use it as the object, and so you need to just notice patterns. So when I was doing the tests, I would write down, as soon as I was looking at the examples, this is like subject, this is object, this is the verb, and just note them down on the side. And every piece of vocab that I saw, I would like scribble it down on the side, so when I came to the sentences they gave me to translate, I vaguely actually knew what the vocab was, even if it had a different form or a different ending. So I would highly recommend scribbling down things at the beginning, so that you're not constantly always having to look back at the examples to see what the word actually means. And practice the timing, because I think some people run out of time. I didn't run out of time for my exam, but I know that some people that I was talking to who also did the exam, they really struggled with their timing, because it is only an hour long, and you can just end up getting stuck on this. There's 2 pages of this made-up language, and then lose out on all the other sections, which is like grammar and other obscure real languages. So yeah, just practice the timing when you're doing the past papers. And I don't really know what else to say, because you can't really prepare for it other than making sure you know the technique that you're going to use when you're going into it with this really random, obscure, made-up language. But I really enjoyed the test. If you're analytical and kind of mathematical, it's just like a puzzle. You just kind of fit it and piece it together. And I really, really enjoyed it, my test.
Yeah, I think I can pretty much like completely agree with your point about like, how do I even revise for this?
Yeah.
Because, so for the physics aptitude test, the PAT, half of it is maths and half of it is physics. But I mean, the physics questions are basically maths anyway. But there are no solutions. You can find past papers, but there are no solutions online. If you do a bit of Google searching, you can find some solutions to some of them on things like Student Room, but obviously like take that with a pinch of salt, because it's just like random people. So I found that quite difficult, because you try and do like practice questions, and then you get stuck, and then there's not that much you can do. So for the maths questions, it was kind of not too bad, because I could ask my maths and further maths teachers. But at my FE college, like none of the physics teachers had done a physics degree. So when it came to physics questions, I would take it to them and be like, how do I do this? And they'd be like, I don't know. But something that I found really helpful was doing like timed practice ones. So I asked for a empty classroom in my college, and then just did like the test as well as I could. But also another thing to note is that the percentage that you have to get to be interviewed is about like 60%, 50 to 60%.
Yeah, I think it was the same with my test as well.
Yeah. And so it's really hard to judge when you've actually done it right and when you haven't done it right, because like a lot of the people probably applying to Oxford are going to be used to like noticing where like the 80%, 90% borderline is, but when it comes to 50%, you're just kind of there like, I'm doing terrible.
It's good enough to get the 50%.
Exactly, and you have no idea how to judge that. Yeah, so it was quite crazy, but I think just kind of like hope and pray. And if you're not quite sure like exactly what to do, but you kind of know what's going on, I think especially in the physics questions, write it down. So if you don't know how to prove something mathematically, just be like, I think this should increase for these reasons, and that way at least it shows that like you understand the concept, and because you can get marks for that as well.
So what kind of thing is in the PAT? Is that like a syllabus? Is it like A-level stuff?
It's meant to be like A-level and GCSE, but like some of the stuff I hadn't learned and wouldn't have learned until like after Christmas anyway, if I carried on doing with like my FE colleges, like how they time it. So I did have to teach myself quite a few things that I wouldn't have known already. But the syllabus is quite vague. It's sort of like, especially for the maths section, it's like, we'll know calculus. I mean, I'm still learning calculus now, so like at what level? But I think the best way to judge that is by looking at past paper questions about what is actually on the syllabus.
Yeah, well, for the ELAT, it was similar in the sense that you can't really revise for it. And basically what it is they give you like about 6 texts, so there'll be either like a poem or an extract from a novel or a play or something, and you have to compare either 2 or 3 of them in about an hour and a half
on a particular theme. So it's meant to be that you're not going to recognise the text, so like don't worry if you don't know what's happening, that's supposed to happen. I don't think I recognised anything on mine. And yeah, the best bit of advice is just to do a time practice, because I think I ran out of time during mine, and just to get your teacher to kind of like have a look over it, because there's going to be no mark scheme because it's not a right or a wrong answer, but there is and like examiners' criteria online, so they kind of like they say what they want you to be doing, and also to plan before you start writing the essay. Just do like a really brief plan of like which text you're going to be doing and like how you're going to write it out, otherwise you're just going to run out of time. It's hard to tell how you've done because like you know you don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it's only a small part of the like application process, and there's a lot more to hand in. I know with English you have to hand in some written assessment too, and then you've got your interview, so like not to worry too much if you don't feel like it went amazingly well.
Just read through some papers so that you have a rough idea of how long you want to spend on each section. So I think there were 4 or 5 sections maybe, so be like, right, okay, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on each one and then go back and check or something. And don't be terrified if it isn't exactly the same structure as past papers, because I think they introduced a slightly different section in our year 1, and I freaked out about that, and then I was like, okay, it's just I'll do the bits that I'm familiar with first, like you'll be okay.
Don't stress too much.
Do some time practice just to make sure you're really comfortable with timings, and kind of enjoy it if you can. Like it is like solving little puzzles, and like if you like that kind of thing, then it will be really fun for you.
And don't feel you have to suddenly swat up on vocabulary and stuff, because it's not about vocabulary. Good luck.
Good luck.
I would say don't worry if it goes wrong, because Oxford's not for everyone. The experience that you have here is not going to suit everyone. Not everyone's going to enjoy it.
Yeah,
so if like any aptitude test does go wrong, it's not the end of the world. There are plenty of other places out there, and despite this like hype bubble around Oxford, there are good things and bad things about it, just like any other place.
Yeah, exactly.
And somewhere like Manchester or Birmingham might suit you more. So yeah, don't stress too much.
Yeah, and I would also say if you come out of the CLAT or the OLAT thinking that you did awfully, then that's completely normal, because it is difficult. It is a test of your aptitude for languages. And with humanities subjects, unlike with science, if you do badly in the test, that doesn't mean that your application is completely scrapped and that you don't get an interview. There are lots of different areas of your application. And my advice for anyone in the last week before the exam is to just make sure you've done at least one of the paid practice past papers in time conditions, especially now that I've discovered you guys have a mark scheme. So
there's no excuse.
There's no excuse. And at least now that because there's 2 papers which have mark schemes, you kind of will gauge how well you're doing anyway, and you can see which areas that you are worst at in the different sections, whether that's the made-up language section, or whether that's the looking at the grammar syntax of a real language, or whether that's the English language section. So you can kind of see what bit you need to work on more, I suppose, but don't stress about it too much. Make sure you get enough sleep, and it's not the be-all and end-all.
Yeah, I would agree with what Viola said in just doing at least one test in time conditions, because that's really going to help you, but generally not to stress too much, because it's quite a fun bit, similar to your exams, like unseen compare and contrast questions, so it's actually just a fun way. And don't worry if you don't recognise all the texts as well, because you're not supposed to.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.